My aunt looked me dead in the eyes at my grandmother's funeral and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "You were never supposed to be part of this family. You're just a mistake your father made." I was 26 years old. I was standing next to my grandmother's casket, and the woman who said that to me was someone I had called family my entire life. I didn't cry. I didn't yell back. I just stood there with my hands folded in front of me, feeling something go cold inside my chest, the way a candle goes out. Not with a dramatic flicker, but just quietly, suddenly, gone. That moment is where this story really begins. But to understand why those words hit me the way they did, you have to understand what my grandmother meant to me, and you have to understand what she left behind when she died. My name is Serena. I grew up in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, in a house that was always a little too quiet. My dad, his name was Patrick, left when I was 4. I don't have a lot of memories of him. What I do have is a photograph my grandmother gave me when I was about 12, of him holding me as a baby, laughing at something off camera. He looked happy. My grandmother said he always looked happy in those years, before everything fell apart between him and my mother. My mother remarried when I was 6. My stepfather was fine. Not cruel, not warm, just there, the way furniture is there. He had 2 kids from his first marriage who came on weekends, and those weekends were the only times our house felt like anything. I spent most of my childhood feeling like a guest in my own home. The one place I never felt like a guest was my grandmother's house. My grandmother, my father's mother, Loretta, lived about 40 minutes away in a farmhouse she'd owned since the late 70s. She had a garden that took up half the backyard, a dog named Biscuit who was perpetually ancient and somehow never died, in a habit of making enough food to feed 12 people even when it was just the 2 of us. I spent nearly every summer there from the time I was 5 until I was 17. She taught me to make biscuits from scratch, to drive her old truck down the long gravel driveway, to play gin rummy badly but enthusiastically. She also told me, more times than I can count, that I was the best thing her son ever did. She never explained what she meant by that. She didn't have to. I understood that it was her way of saying, you are loved here, fully, without conditions. When your own home doesn't feel like that, you hold on to places that do. You hold on tight. My dad passed away when I was 19. A heart attack, sudden and unfair, the way those things always are. I had reconnected with him a little by then. Awkward phone calls and one visit that ended with both of us crying in a Denny's parking lot. We were working our way towards something. We just didn't have enough time. After he died, my relationship with my grandmother became something different, more urgent somehow, more like family and less like memory. She started calling me every Sunday. I started driving out to see her once a month, then more. She got older and I got older, and we talked about everything. Her life, my life, the mistakes we'd each made, the things we were still hoping for. She never talked much about money. I didn't either. That wasn't what we were to each other. So when she passed away 2 years ago, peacefully, in her sleep, at 81, and her attorney contacted me 3 weeks later to say she had left me the farmhouse and a trust worth just over $2 million, I genuinely did not know what to do with that information. I sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex and read the email 4 times. Then I called my best friend Jess and said, I think something happened and I don't know how to feel about it. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no idea about, was that my aunt had known about the will for months, and she had already started making plans. My dad's sister, my Aunt Renata, is 12 years younger than he was. She grew up in the same farmhouse, same garden, same Biscuit, or one of his predecessors. I was never totally clear on whether the dog was immortal or just repeatedly replaced, but she and my grandmother had a complicated relationship. My grandmother was warm but had expectations. Renata, by her own admission, had never lived up to them. She got into debt in her 20s, borrowed money from my grandmother and never paid it back, married a man everyone disliked, divorced him expensively. By the time my grandmother passed, they had reached a kind of functional détente. They spoke on holidays, Renata visited a few times a year, everything surface level and careful. I had always been polite to Renata. We weren't close. She called me Patrick's girl in a tone I could never quite read. Sometimes fond, sometimes something else. At the funeral, I found out what that something else was. After she said what she said to me, you were never supposed to be part of this family. You're just a mistake your father made. I stepped away. I went outside and sat on the front steps of the funeral home until my hands stopped shaking. Jess found me out there and sat with me without saying anything, which was exactly right. I told myself Renata was grieving. That she was jealous, maybe, that my grandmother and I had been close. I told myself it was a bad moment and I would let it go. I let it go for about 3 weeks. Then the calls started. The first call was from my grandmother's neighbor, a retired school teacher named Harriet, who had known Loretta for 30 years. She called to offer her condolences and ended up saying something that stopped me cold. I just want to make sure you're aware, Harriet said carefully, that Renata has been over here quite a bit, going through the house. I didn't know if you knew. I didn't know. I was the named heir to the property. No one had given Renata a key. I called the attorney, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Calloway, who had handled my grandmother's estate planning, and asked whether Renata had any legal right to be in the house. He said no. He also told me with some hesitation that Renata had contacted his office twice in the past month asking about the will, about whether it could be contested, about what grounds might exist to challenge it. I sat with that for a long moment. Can it be contested? I asked. He told me the will was extremely solid. My grandmother had updated it 18 months before her death, had been of clear mind, had signed in front of witnesses. A challenge was possible. Anyone can file anything. But it would be difficult and unlikely to succeed. However, he added, I'd encourage you to get your own legal representation, just to be safe. I hired an attorney the next day. Her name was Ms. Alvarez, and she was the kind of person who listened to everything and then said exactly what she thought, without softening it. I liked her immediately. What Ms. Alvarez found over the following weeks was not what I expected. It wasn't just that Renata was planning to contest the will. It was that she had been in contact with someone at the county clerk's office, a man named White, who it turned out was an old friend of her ex-husband, and together they had been quietly exploring whether there was any administrative mechanism to delay the transfer of the property title, not to stop it permanently, just to delay it long enough to create leverage. There was more. My grandmother had a small investment account, separate from the trust, that had not been specifically named in the will. It was supposed to pass through the estate as general assets. Renata had gotten someone to help her file paperwork claiming she was the next of kin for that account, using my grandmother's death certificate and some documentation that Miss Spack, Alvarez later described carefully as questionable in its accuracy. The account had about $60,000 in it. Not life-changing money. But that wasn't the point. The point was that she had forged something, or helped forge something, or known about the forgery and let it happen. I remember sitting in Miss Alvarez's office when she walked me through it, and feeling something I hadn't felt since I was a little girl, standing in my mother's house feeling invisible. That specific kind of hurt that comes when someone treats you like you don't deserve to exist. But I was 26, not 6, and this time I knew what to do with it. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. The hardest part was finding out who else knew. My aunt had a boyfriend. She'd been with him for about 2 years, a man named Craig who worked in insurance and had very strong opinions about college football. I had met him twice, found him unremarkable both times, and mostly forgot he existed. It turned out Craig was the one who had connected Renata with Dwight at the county clerk's office, and he had done it knowing exactly what they were trying to accomplish. When Ms. Alvarez brought this to me, I asked the same question you're probably asking. Why? What did Craig get out of it? The answer, when it came out, was depressingly simple. Renata had promised him a cut. Not in writing. Nothing about this was in writing. Which was simultaneously how they thought they'd get away with it, and how they almost did. But Craig had been doing his girlfriend a favor and expecting to be rewarded for it. And Dwight had apparently been doing Craig a favor and expecting the same. A small, quiet conspiracy held together by favors and handshake deals, and the assumption that I was too young and too overwhelmed to look closely. They were wrong about that. Ms. Alvarez worked with a forensic accountant to document everything related to the investment account. She filed a complaint with the state bar referencing Dwight's conduct. Turns out using your county clerk position to help facilitate estate fraud is frowned upon, shockingly. She also contacted the estate attorney to put everything related to the property title on formal legal hold while we documented the delay campaign. The whole process took about 4 months. 4 months of phone calls and paperwork and feeling like I was living inside a bureaucratic nightmare while also trying to grieve my grandmother and work my regular job and sleep like a normal human being. I was not sleeping like a normal human being. There was one week in the middle of all of it where I just fell apart. Jess drove to my apartment on the Tuesday night because I hadn't returned her texts, and she found me sitting on my kitchen floor eating cereal out of the box, which she says was the most concerning thing she had ever seen. She made me get up and eat something real and talk to her for 2 hours, and then she stayed over and slept on my couch. I tell you this because I want you to know it was not a movie. It was not a clean, satisfying arc where I was brave and fierce every day. Some days I was brave. Some days I was on the kitchen floor. Renata called me once during those 4 months. I almost didn't pick up. She didn't know at that point how much we had documented. She didn't know about Ms. Alvarez or the forensic accountant or the formal complaints. She was calling, I think, to take the temperature, to see if I was the kind of person who would just quietly go away. She was pleasant, almost friendly. She said she'd been thinking about me, said she knew this was a hard time, said she hoped I was taking care of myself. Then she said, almost as an aside, I've been talking to some people about the estate. I just want to make sure we're handling everything fairly, as a family. I let her talk. I didn't say much. I was thinking about my grandmother's kitchen, the way it smelled like coffee and dish soap and something floral I could never identify. I was thinking about the photograph of my dad, laughing at something off camera. When Renata finished, I said, I appreciate you reaching out. My attorney will be in touch. The silence that followed was very satisfying. Here is what happened to everyone involved, because you deserve to know the whole story. Dwight, the man at the county clerk's office, was removed from his position after the state bar complaint triggered an investigation. The investigation found that this wasn't the first time he'd used his position to assist people in questionable legal maneuvers. There were 2 other cases that came to light. He was also referred to the county district attorney's office. Last I heard, he was facing criminal charges for misconduct in office, and in one of the other cases, fraud. Craig Renata's boyfriend was never formally charged with anything. The arrangement between them was verbal, there was nothing in writing, and while he clearly knew what Renata was trying to do, proving he actively facilitated it in a criminal sense was a higher bar than what the evidence supported. Ms. Alvarez was honest with me about this, frustrating but real. He did, however, get dropped by his insurance firm when the investigation became known in professional circles. Apparently, they had some concerns about his judgment. Good. Renata contested the will. Ms. Alvarez had predicted this, and she had prepared for it. The contest was filed, reviewed, and dismissed within about 6 weeks. The judge found no evidence of undue influence, no evidence my grandmother lacked capacity, and noted, somewhat pointedly, that the will had been updated well in advance of her death with every indication of intentionality. The estate was released to me in full. The investment account was recovered and included in the settlement. Renata was ordered to pay a portion of my legal fees. I do not know what Renata's life looks like now. I haven't spoken to her since that phone call. I don't have any plans to. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry at her, and I think the honest answer is, not anymore. I was, for a long time. I was furious in a way that took up a lot of space in me. But fury like that is exhausting to carry, and I had better things to do with the space. I moved into my grandmother's farmhouse 8 months ago. The garden was overgrown. No one had tended it since she passed, and a season and a half of neglect had let things go wild. I spent a whole weekend in October just clearing it out, pulling dead stalks and turning soil, and somewhere in the middle of that I started crying and couldn't stop for about 20 minutes. Not sad crying, exactly. Just the kind of crying that happens when your body decides it's finally time. Biscuit, the current Biscuit, the 4th or 5th by my count, lives with me now. He is, in keeping with family tradition, very old and apparently immortal. He sleeps on the rug next to my grandmother's old armchair, which is where I sit most evenings. The farmhouse needed work. The roof had a section that needed replacing, 2 of the windows were drafty, and the kitchen needed to be updated badly enough that even I, who know very little about kitchens, could see it. I'm doing the repairs methodically, one thing at a time, the way my grandmother would have. She didn't believe in rushing things that deserved patience. I hung the photograph of my dad in the hallway. He's laughing at something off camera. I don't know what it was, and I've made peace with not knowing. He looks happy. That's enough. Some things I want you to know. If you're in something like this, if you're dealing with family that makes you feel like you don't belong, like your existence is an inconvenience, like the love you were given was something you have to fight to keep. You are allowed to fight. You are allowed to hire someone smart and show up to every meeting and read every document and ask every question and refuse to go away quietly. Being young doesn't mean being powerless. Being overwhelmed doesn't mean being wrong. And if someone tells you that you are never supposed to be part of the family, look around at what the family actually is. Look at who showed up. Look at who loved you without conditions, without an agenda, without wanting anything back. My grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she updated that will. She was not confused. She was not manipulated. She was not a woman who made mistakes like that. She was a woman who spent 30 years watching me grow up and decided clearly and deliberately that this was what she wanted for me. I think about her every morning when I make coffee in her kitchen. I think about her on Sunday afternoons when I should be calling someone but just sit in the armchair instead, in the quiet, with the old dog snoring next to me. She was the best thing I ever had, and she left me something I will take care of for the rest of my life. Not because of what it's worth, but because of what it means. That's everything. That's the whole story. Except, and I say this last, because I mean it last, not first. If this resonated with you, if you've been through something like this, or you're in the middle of it right now, leave me a comment. I read every one. And subscribe if you want more stories like this. Real ones, honest ones, the kind that don't wrap up perfectly but wrap up true. Thank you for being here. I've thought a lot about why Renata did what she did. Not to excuse it. There's no version of that story where forging documents and conspiring to delay a grieving woman's inheritance is excusable. But because I genuinely wanted to understand it, and what I came to after a lot of quiet evenings in my grandmother's armchair is this. People who feel entitled to things they didn't earn will always find a reason why they deserve them more than you do. Renata had spent decades telling herself a story about my grandmother, about my father, about me. In that story, I was the outsider, the mistake, the girl who wandered into a family she had no right to and was inexplicably loved anyway. And when my grandmother left me everything she'd worked her whole life to build, it didn't just feel unfair to Renata. It felt like a personal verdict. Proof that the story she'd been telling herself was wrong. What she did next. The forged paperwork, the calls to Dwight, the campaign to delay and discredit. That wasn't a calculated criminal scheme so much as it was a desperate person trying to rewrite an ending she couldn't accept. I'm not saying that to be generous. I'm saying it because understanding the why of something is the only way to stop it from eating you alive. Here's what I know about what actually determines how things turn out. It's not luck, and it's not fairness, and it's not who deserves what in some cosmic ledger. It's what you do when the situation is real and uncomfortable and no one is coming to handle it for you. When Ms. Alvarez first laid out what Renata had done, I had two choices. I could feel overwhelmed and hope it resolved itself, or I could show up to every meeting, every phone call, every document review, and be the person who refused to be invisible. I chose the second thing, not because I'm particularly brave, but because my grandmother spent 30 years showing me what it looked like to tend something carefully. The garden. The farmhouse. A relationship with a granddaughter who needed to feel like she belonged somewhere. She didn't do any of that loudly. She just did it, consistently, with her whole attention. That's the model I had. That's the model I followed. Renata lost not because the universe punished her, but because she cut corners on everything, the documentation, the ethics, the basic human decency of letting a grieving person grieve, and corners cut at that scale leave evidence. Craig lost his job for the same reason. Dwight faces criminal charges for the same reason. What you do when you think no one is watching is exactly what determines where you end up when everyone is. And I think about that when I look at the photograph of my dad in the hallway. He was laughing at something I'll never know about. He didn't get enough time, but the one thing he did that lasted, loving a woman named Loretta, being her son, being my father even imperfectly, that thing rippled forward in ways no one could have predicted. My grandmother felt it. I feel it. The farmhouse is still standing. You build something real, or you don't. That's all it ever comes down to.